Hi, everyone, and welcome to Smart Franchising with Fransmart. We know you're used to hearing Dan Rowe, the powerhouse behind Fransmart. But this season, we're doing something a little different. It's the Fransmart team takeover. We've taken over Dan's mic because, honestly, we wanted in on the fun. We've been dying to talk to some of the franchisees we admire most, and this was our shot. Each episode, a member of the Fransmart team will sit down with a franchising powerhouse to swap stories, lessons, and insider tips from the field. Let's get into it. Welcome to Smart Franchising with Fransmart, Team Takeover. So welcome everyone to Smart Franchising with Fransmart Team Takeover. We're excited to do this season, and our team gets to do a little bit of their own spin on it and interview their guests. I'm Lynnea Morano. I'm Marketing Director for Fransmart, and I'm really happy to introduce Carl Stoffers, one of the amazing editors and journalists with Entrepreneur magazine. So Carl, I'll pass it over to you and just let you kind of introduce yourself a little more and tell us a little bit about you.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. As you said, I'm the senior business editor at Entrepreneur magazine. I cover franchises only. I've been there for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was managing editor at a website called IPVM, which covers the video surveillance industry. And then prior to that, I had stops at the New York Times up front, New York Daily News, Marshall Project, so on and so forth. So been around a little bit, but definitely found a home at Entrepreneur and in the franchise industry.
Awesome. So, and tell us a little bit more about your whole career journey, because I know you have somewhat of a unique path that led you to being a writer and a journalist. And I kind of feel like that somewhat relates to somewhat of what you do in the franchise industry and working with people that are passionate about what they do.
Yeah, I was in a different career. I was in law enforcement. I worked for the Arizona Department of Corrections. But I had always been someone who would read anything I could get my hands on. I was, as a kid, I would, take a book and go in the closet and read if I had to. I just, with a flashlight, it was one of those things, which really led to me having an interest in writing. Unfortunately, I didn't really grow up in a time and in an area where it was encouraged. Most of my family was cops and firemen, and they didn't go to college and things like that. They sort of came from a different time. So I wasn't really encouraged to be a writer or a journalist. But, when you find yourself working 12 hours a day in a maximum security prison out in the middle of the desert, it can cause you to do a little bit of thinking, right? And so I knew that that's not where I wanted to spend the rest of my life, professional life. And so I ended up leaving and kind of going after this ridiculous dream of becoming a journalist. And I was fortunate to have people around me who were, supportive and encouraged me at the time. And I just kind of went for it. And I think to the second part of your question, I feel a definite bond with a lot of the franchisees, especially that I speak to, that come from other backgrounds. And it's a lot. It's a lot more than I would have thought before I got into this industry. But when they say, I left this corporate job, a steady corporate job that paid me well, and I left a government job that had good benefits and good retirement and things like that. And I ended up entering an industry that at the time was sort of collapsing. So no one ever said I had good timing, but yeah, I definitely feel for these people that I talked to that just sort of burned their boats and said, I'm going into franchising. I'm going to forget about, my old life and build a new one. And so I definitely feel that sort of kinship with those people.
Yeah, well, and you know what they say, if you can be successful in the hardest time in the industry, then that's the best time to get into it, right? So I'm sure you can kind of relate to that with your career and then also these franchisees too, because it almost never feels like the right time to dive into franchising, So yeah, so I guess let's kind of dive a little bit more into the franchising aspect. So I'll just kind of open up the whole subject, but are there some big shifts you've seen recently? What are some things that have really stood out to you just overall in the industry?
So I think what we're seeing in the industry right now is a couple of things. Number one, diversification beyond food. Even people who aren't very familiar with franchising understand now that it's more than just McDonald's. And that's because of the exposure that they're getting to things like home services, healthcare, pet franchises, education-related franchises. And as consumer demand has trended towards professionalization, we're certainly not seeing prices go down anywhere. Things are getting more expensive, and people want value for their money. And the example I always give is when I was growing up, if my dad wanted to have our driveway seal coated, let's say, he would ask the landscaper, and the landscaper would go, I could figure it out. I'll charge this guy $500. And, and then my dad would give him the money, right? And then the next year, the driveway would be even worse, right? What we're seeing now with these brands, and I'm thinking of brands like Neighborly and Authority, that are umbrella brands that have various different home services sectors that can kind of cross-pollinate with each other. And so we're seeing a lot of growth in that sector, non-food categories, that are recession resistant, like healthcare, senior care, home maintenance. So, these franchises, were smart. Instead of referring them out to other, companies, they're keeping it in-house, and they can handle this in-house, but give the consumer the professionalism that they're demanding. So you've got, your landscaping guy will refer the seal coating guy that's underneath the umbrella. And it's sort of, is self-sustaining after a while.
Yeah. And for franchisees, I guess, what are you seeing the kind of type of franchisees come into this? Because I know you and I previously talked about there's almost two different types, right? You see the people that are really big, really into food, have a widespread, network, and then maybe some of these that are going into the home service brands or umbrella are just kind of a different type of franchisee.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is you're always going to have the multi-brand owner, the athlete. I did a story on Drew Brees about a month ago, getting involved. He's involved in all sorts of different franchises and things like that. The latest one is Everbowl. But you're always going to have investors like that. But what we're also seeing is, particularly in like home services categories, is the sort of beginning of these mobile franchises that are lowering the barrier to entry. So, you can be a franchisee now for under $10,000. 30 years ago, 25 years ago, that probably wasn't the case, right? You would have had to have a massive build out. It would have been very expensive, pretty much regardless of what industry you're talking about. Now, the barrier to entries are lower. It's opening up franchising and business ownership and entrepreneurship to an entirely new group of people who would have been shut out before because they don't have $2 million in cash. And you're talking about, underrepresented groups in a lot of different industries. I'm thinking particularly, again, in home services. I've done multiple stories this year on female owners who are involved in things like HVAC, siding, roofing. And these women have told me stories about when they started, they'd show up at jobs and people would tell them, send a man next time. And this is not the 1950s we're talking about. This is 10, 15 years ago. So it's moving very quickly. It's changing very quickly. But these are good moves for sure. The industry is definitely, becoming more inclusive, more open. And when you've got those people that previously were shut out of business ownership that now get that shot, and yet they have that entrepreneurial spirit, I mean, they can do great things.
Yeah. And so what, people who are maybe big franchisees versus smaller or people looking to get into it, who would you recommend these home service brands to? Is it because from my perspective, it's a great starter option for people in franchising. Like you said, it's a low barrier to entry. Typically, like they're their own operators at first and really building out that team. Not that we don't see that we have brands that range, but obviously not that low for entry costs, but we kind of see that as well. Sometimes people start out a little lower and then work their way up. But is that kind of who you'd really recommend for those brands, or what you're really seeing in those franchisees, or do you kind of just see a wide cast of people?
What I would say is those brands, the home services type brands, are good to start out as an owner operator, because you are dealing directly with the customer. If you're you're gutter cleaning, you're going to show up with that truck and you're going to interact with that person and talk about their home and things like that. So obviously, the more physical labor based franchisees are going to be for people that are a little bit younger and a little bit more, I guess, towards the beginning. But I don't think in any way that I would necessarily say they're sort of starter kind of franchises. I think there is a lot of money to be made and progress to be made in the multi-unit and multi-brand ownership in that field. I'm thinking of an interview I did the other day for the print magazine that will publish over the winter with a franchisee from Wonderly Lights, and which is a outdoor lighting franchise. Obviously, their busy point is Halloween through the first week in January. It's murder, right? But then he's also got a Mosquito Joe franchise, and that's a pest control franchise. So as soon as the Wonderly business starts to sort of wrap up, he goes right into his Mosquito Joe. So I see a lot of that as well, where and he's at the point now where he's got crews out doing the work. He's not out doing the work himself, but that sort of synergy and that sort of ability to cross promote, is really key, I think, in growing those businesses in that field.
Yeah, kind of like building your portfolio for seasonality, so maximizing on the seasons. That is very interesting, because you kind of see that. You can see that in food sometimes too, obviously depending on the market you're in or whatnot. But I guess that's kind of a segue into talking about the evolution of food, because you and I were talking the other day about how we've personally seen a big shift. Fransmart's very big into restaurants, and that's how we started out. And then, we started adding some retail brands, and now it's shifted to very low labor, very simple operation food. And we've seen kind of an increase overall in the industry in that direction, but still with high quality. So like a different level of fast food, I think, is what I feel like is emerging.
Yeah. I think what we're seeing is we're seeing a return of simplified food concepts that are fun, fast, and Instagrammable. People want that bit of experience along with these kind of niche foods, right? So I'm thinking of something like Pop-Up Bagels. I did a story on them not too long ago. Their whole focus is it's limited hours. They've got no fryers. They've got no soda machines. They've got a rotating menu of a couple of different bagels and some spreads. But they generate a ton of buzz on social media. They have a very unique culture, and they do one thing, bagels, and they do it really well, and that's it. And they stick to that. And I think you're seeing, obviously, not big brands like McDonald's and Taco Bell. They've got to do everything, but smaller brands, and I'm talking about brands that people have started, in their kitchens. Smaller brands can carve out their own sort of ecosystem in the overall franchise picture, by sticking to that game plan and definitely keeping it small menu, high volume, and trendy.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to think about as well. Like, they have to focus on that simplicity, that one item or a few items, and keep it easy, especially in a franchise model, but also in the fact that you have all these massive brands, McDonald's, Taco Bell, Chick-fil-A, even though it's not technically a franchise, but so it's kind of like that market is so dominated and covered by brands that have a wide variety menu. So it really is kind of breaking the mold. And I know you and I didn't talk about this much, but I've been reading and seeing a lot about the beverage industry as well. And that's, kind of a new world, I think, in franchising, a lot like,
Certainly, yeah.
Swig and Seven Brew. So all these brands kind of popping up. What's your take on that? Have you dove into anything recently?
We haven't covered that sector too much, but what I could say about it is it's sort of the same thing that goes for that niche food sector. Do that one thing and do it really well, and build your brand on that. I think the thing that I've learned from talking to a lot of leadership in this industry is that there's always going to be that pull to do more. If you're a bagel place and you do bagels really well, the natural sort of inclination as an entrepreneur is going to be, well, why don't maybe if we throw some fryers in there and, we can do this. And then, and before you know it, you're running McDonald's, right? So, I think for the beverage sector, it would be the same thing. It would be to stick to doing one thing and doing it really well and building on that, and not forgetting one.
I think that's really what we've seen too, within our brands and then overall in the industry, is just people highly focusing on their quality and service. And that's, really what takes them to the next level. So another thing I kind of wanted to talk about is technology and AI. So just some trends that you're seeing, how you're feeling like it's reshaping. We can start there and then just kind of dive in a little bit more.
Yeah, I think some of the ways you're seeing, AI and technology kind of reshaping things is the emergence and the importance of loyalty apps in interacting with these brands as a consumer. You almost have to have them if you're going to interact with any of these major brands in order to save money and things like that. I think you're also seeing a little bit of AI sort of intrusion into the customer experience. I know Taco Bell floated the AI drive-through, I think it was earlier this year. And I think the lesson learned from that is that technology adoption has to align with customers' comfort zones. All right. And you've got to test this stuff out carefully before you roll it out to consumers, because consumers have a lot of options. And if it's not rolled out properly and it's not rolled out the right way, you're going to see backlash. And I think the real underlying thought here is that really tech should support but not replace the customer experience. All right. And tech should make things a little bit easier. AI should make things easier, but it shouldn't replace that customer experience of going, whether a drive-through or going to the store itself. So with tech, when it's invisible or not really paid a whole lot of attention to, I think customers feel sort of empowered and not displaced. But when you roll it out too soon or you roll it out wrong, bad things can happen.
Yeah. And even from a franchisee perspective, I'm kind of curious to hear your take on that is, because obviously the franchisors have to be really cautious of that. It's a fine line of bringing on the right technology to help the franchisees and make the system better. But then, how easily can you make it for the franchisees to use, and then also having the right customer reception? So that balancing act, I have you seen anyone kind of do that successfully, or the right way to do that?
Yeah, I've seen, and not just in food, but I've seen in the senior care sector, AI and new technologies actually helping with monitoring and things like that. I've seen it help. And if we go back to food for a second, and talk about the adoption there, where the probably there's more consumers interacting with it. What I really think is that, people don't like change, right? A lot of people have to get themselves to a point, and I'm as guilty as anybody. I have to force myself to embrace change, right? Because it happens, change happens, and it's good. But when people are, whether it's the franchisees that I've spoken to answer your question, for the most part are buying into this system no matter what. They have faith in whatever system they're in, and particularly if it's a big system, Taco Bell, for instance, they have faith, and they should have faith. I mean, these are really successful brands. But there's always one or two people that doesn't want to embrace change, still wants to do everything in cash and that sort of thing. But I think those people are few and far between in franchising, because I think the nature of franchising, if you're going to get into it, especially as a franchisee, the nature of it is being nimble, solving problems, coming up with innovative solutions to problems. That's how you get ahead. I mean, you look at McDonald's. I mean, they innovated the whole thing, right? You don't sit around and just let things be in franchising. And I think that has a lot to do with the technology that's kind of permeating the industry right now.
Yeah, and you bring up and kind of an interesting point is when franchisees are looking for the right brand, that trust in the franchisor is so important. And I think that like the type of brand sometimes people get clouded by that. Like, oh, I really love coffee, for example. So it's like, I want a coffee brand. But the two brands that I work with, I just talked to the franchisees, and it was really, one's buy, sell, trade electronics. It's not really that, like, doesn't come off as super sexy, right?
Yes, exactly.
But it's a great model. And then people just say, like, the number one thing is I trust the franchisors, and that's what really got me. I know they're going to take care of me. I know they're going to look into that right technology. And then the same thing with, our other brand. We had a Subway guy, and he's been in franchising for years and years. And I was like, what was the big thing? I just really trust the franchisor. So I think that's a lot that goes into it, and having those the right franchisor when you're going in, and that is going to look into the technology the right way and slowly roll it out, and think of the franchisees. So I think it kind of, in the end, it's all human interaction, right? So it all kind of like ties back to each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. You just made me think of a story that I wrote recently that hasn't even published yet, about a thrift franchise. It's called Kid to Kid, and there's another brand with it called Uptown's Cheapskate. And they're two brothers, and they they said to me when I interviewed them the other day, the one brother said, he goes, I understand this is not the sexiest industry, a thrift store, but they make good money, and it's a solid franchise, and they've been around for a while, and there are all sorts of non-glamorous sorts of areas that you can get into with franchising and really carve out a good name for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, I think and even going back to home service stuff, like you were saying, it's like I think what had to shift for people. And we have one big franchisee who started out in pest control. Now they have all kinds of things, but it's like, you don't think about the path, but they're super successful. So it is kind of interesting. I think there's like a whole thing to uncover about the unsexy brand and why it's becoming sexy.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to that specialization, right? I mean, people want professionals working on their home and their property and things like that, and they're willing to pay for it. So it's overall a good thing.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's a subject I feel like I could talk about forever. We'll shift a little bit so I can get some of your thoughts on these. You've written some recent stories that I kind of pulled out. First was Bright Star Care's big exit, and I think kind of wanted to get your thoughts on building the brand to that point and exiting, and what you've kind of seen in that industry and what has made people successful.
Yeah. So with Bright Star, I think to answer your question first, what the common thread with all of the people that I've written about that are in that field, the franchisees and franchisors, is they get into it for an emotional reason. The Bright Star story was about how this woman was trying to find care for her grandmother who was sick. This is going back about 20 years. And she couldn't find the right type of care. And so she decided to just do it herself. And she saw that void, and she filled it. And she really, I mean, to navigate just the bureaucracy alone of a care franchise that involves nurses across state lines and things like that, with all the different sort of requirements and things like that, was probably incredibly difficult, I would think. And she stuck with it. She spent 20 years building this business, and the $750 million number, she was very, she wanted to make it clear. And I wrote this in the story that that was the total sales for the she didn't walk away with a suitcase full of $750 million. But she did say, it was life-changing money, of course. And I think, a couple of things you can look at. Number one, you look at the amount of money that's involved in that sector. In 20 years, she built almost $1 billion business, right? $750 million. It's proof that mission-driven sectors like that can achieve big exits. You can make that sort of dream come true of building that business, and at the end of the rainbow, there's this big pot of money, right? You can do that and still sleep well at night, knowing that you're helping people and that sort of thing, right? So I think that's really what that story kind of signaled to me was, selling your business that you built for big money is not just for food.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. And just kind of encompassing the evolution of all those different brands, like what we're talking about. So yeah, that's very interesting. And then the next story too, I wanted to touch on, it's a very hot topic, but how to attract your brand for Gen Z and Millennial franchisees. So this is obviously kind of a interesting take, because like we were saying before, it's like you might not have the sexiest brand, but it's a great investment. So how do you add those right things to make it attractive to the new generations?
Yeah, so this was a data story that we did that there was a survey done, and it was really trying to figure out what Gen Z and millennials want in terms of getting into franchising, because it's not just money. There are other considerations at stake here, considerations that, quite frankly, older people probably don't have. So, what we learned from that data is that, Gen Z and millennials seek brands that align with their values and their lifestyle. And that means when I say lifestyle, that means that what's really important to them right after money is flexibility. And being able to, not be chained to a desk 9 to 5, and being able to kind of work remotely, run the business from anywhere. That's becoming increasingly important. And according to this data, was right behind money as, the very second concern. So I think, what that tells us is that generation of entrepreneurs needs meaning with their work, but also needs convenience in order to run the business.
No, I think it's really interesting because mean, I guess I kind of fall into one of those categories. So,
I don't.
but I have seen, just an increase in my generation talking about like even LinkedIn posts. It's like the flexibility is huge. Like you can, if you do better at starting at 10 a.m. and working till 6 and having the opportunity to run to a doctor's appointment or whatever, it is really a big factor, I feel like, in a lot of the new jobs even that we're seeing, outside of franchising. And it's really and even when I interview people for here that are a little bit younger, it's like, oh, well, can I be hybrid or can I be flexible? Or, that's like more so the question they're asking before, like, well, what's the salary range? So it kind of comes into that, how much that, and it all kind of wraps up into that value piece that you talked about at the beginning. So just value overall is really becoming I think, number one priority overall in just business and life. So I guess we can kind of do just a very quick overview on your take of the joint employer ruling, American Franchisee Association Act and whatnot. So if you just want to kind of give us I know you've done a lot of research, you said, on this, kind of quick overview of your take on it. And that would be great.
Yeah, what I would say is that joint employer has been like a moving target for years. Rules change, they get reversed, then they resurface. But at its core, franchisors want clear limits on liability, and franchisees want their independence protected. That's really what it's all about. The IFA has been very vocal about giving franchisees a stronger voice. But in the end, the real issue is clarity and stability from the federal government, so everyone knows the rules of the game. Because having this whiplash back and forth not only makes it difficult for me to cover, but I can only imagine when I talk to franchisors and franchisees, this whiplash affects them even more because this is their livelihood.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good take, and I think at the end of the day, that's kind of how everyone's feeling. So
yeah, for sure.
Clarity and consistency.
It's about time. It's time. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So kind of wrapping up a little bit here, but just going back to what you do on the daily, you get dozens and dozens of pitches a day. So in your mind, just picking your brain a little bit, what makes a franchise story actually stand out to you? When you're going through everything?
It's got to have a relevancy to the industry, obviously. And for me, primarily what I write about is success stories. And so it's got to have that human element. Our readers really like to read about people that have that have overcome obstacles, that have built things. They love those, rags to riches kind of stories. So what I look for is, number one, a business relevance. There's got to be a reason why we're doing this. And then, the backstory, and is the backstory compelling, and is it going to grab our readers? Can I tell that story in a way that our readers are going to want to keep reading?
Yeah. That's what I have to give Dan Rowe a little credit here. He always taught me, write one line that makes someone want to read the next line, and then go.
He's absolutely correct. Yeah.
So it's tough, though. I mean, I'm sure as a writer too, once you're putting that story together, it's like, it's easy to be like, oh gosh, how do you put yourself in the other person's shoes?
Exactly. And the thing about being a reporter is that when you interview people, if you get them to really open up, there are times where they'll overshare and they'll share things that, and so you have to have that discretion as well to kind of say, okay, well, maybe this doesn't belong here, and that sort of thing, but it's a good problem to have.
Yeah. And I totally see that too on my end, interviewing a lot of our franchisees. It's,
I'm sure. Yeah.
Because, well, I mean, a lot of them, it's crazy, the backgrounds that they've been through and experienced. And Yeah, franchising, you just kind of uncover everything, right? When you're talking about someone's story. So
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
it can get very personal for sure.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm really blessed. I really my job is to talk to successful people every day and tell their stories. I take so much away from being able to speak to these people. Franchising attracts unique personalities, and the successful people that I've had to speak to have had to overcome serious challenges and setbacks on the way to the top. So being able to help them reflect on that journey and then tell the story to our readers, nothing better than that for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we were kind of talking about that the other day, and I can relate. It seems like a funny industry to be, so excited about, but once you kind of open that door and you're just kind of led into all these franchisees and franchisors seeing their dreams kind of come true, right? And helping be part of that, I think it's really rewarding. So I can really relate to you with that. Awesome. So as we wrap up, just kind of a few quick ones, like, is there a favorite story that you've written or even read lately that you'd recommend or share? And, any other recommendations you kind of have for our listeners, whether they're franchisees, franchisors, people in the industry. I think, they love to kind of hear from your experience.
Yeah, well, in terms of recommendations for franchisors and franchisees, I would say, keep an eye out for our Franchise 500, which is going to come out in January, and just keep updated on the website. We converted to a new CMS, so we're sort of making some changes, and I think there's going to be some things coming down the road for both of those groups that are going to be really helpful. So keep an eye on that. And as far as a recent story, I would say I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago on a woman named Lisa Starnes, who is a Captain D's franchisee. Captain D's is like a QSR seafood franchise. She inherited a 10-unit business after her husband had a sudden heart attack. This is back in the early 90s, and $700,000 in debt. Rather than accept everyone's advice to sell or declare bankruptcy, she decided that she wasn't going to do any of that, and she was going to fix it herself. This is a woman who was an administrative assistant at a company prior to this, had no experience at all. And so what she did was she actually dug in. She closed some underperforming stores. She dug in and led weekly manager meetings. She micromanaged costs. She did everything she could to rebuild this business. And over time, she paid off that $700,000 debt. Recently opened her first new location in about 15 years and is doing like 10 million in revenue. So just off the top of my head recently, that was a story that just blew my mind. People like that are why I love my job. I mean, to be able to hear that story and knowing what she went through and knowing what she's built was just really inspiring.
Yeah. And I think it kind of goes back to everything we've talking about, is like, at the end of the day, it's like just humans figuring out how to take care of other humans, right? So she just, like, even without her experience, she dove in and just said, okay, what does this business really need? And sounds like she really flipped that model, and just, the overall management of it and that customer service side, I'm sure, was a huge improvement. So, yeah, that's awesome. It's just really incredible. And I think a lot of times too, people don't realize how incredible the stories are for franchisees, because they think of franchising as so, oh, well, you have a system. Oh, it's rinse and repeat. It's, but it really does, obviously you do have the systems in the franchisor, but there is a lot on the franchisee side where you, that is your business. That is your life. You give away sometimes your life savings to start that and more in her case.
Right.
So,
right. And working harder than you ever thought was possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it obviously does pay off. That's a great thing about franchising. Typically, if you do it the right way, it can be a really great way to create generational wealth and,
Absolutely. Yeah.
So awesome. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I appreciate all your thoughts, and I know our listeners will be really excited to hear from, typically we do franchisees themselves, but I think it's something a little bit different when you've talked to dozens and dozens of franchisees, and to have your knowledge and your thoughts on the industry, I know will be super, super valuable for our listeners. And obviously for me as well. It's been really great to talk to you and learn from you. So, awesome. Well, thank you for everything. And, we'll kind of wrap up here.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate talking to you.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to Smart Franchising with Fransmart. I'm your host, Dan Rowe. If you enjoyed today's episode, this podcast is only going to get better. Please like, comment, and subscribe to hear more from the most successful franchisors and franchisees, and we'll see you next time.